Yes, yes, yes. What is up? What is up? Journal Strike podcast family, Turning Down Network family, all that fun stuff. Mixed Combat Radio is obviously the show that me and Gary do, and how me and Gary know each other, talking boxing, combat sports, and all that fun stuff. And very, very excited to have him back on the show to debate. You know, me and Gary are friends, so it's not like we're gonna get like heated, like debate bro bullshit. But to debate a list of questions I asked him to create on why he doesn't like communism, why just questions overall on communism. And it's a decent list of questions. I will say, like, I reject all of the questions that you sent in on like their basis, but like they're good questions still. So I cannot wait to dive into it. But Gary, how you doing?
I'm good. The first two are just intake questions. I mean, you don't disagree that America makes communism its fake enemy?
No, I don't disagree with that.
That's the first question. Well, that's the first and second question. That was the first question.
It's the framing of it, Gary. We're going to get into it.
Oh, we'll get into it. They were just I just wanted to hear your opinion on it to set up the other questions. Like, I don't want to because we are friends. And I'm not necessarily trying to win a debate. I'm just trying to have a debate. I don't want to straw man you or like I always get. Well, you're a libertarian, so if you put me in your hot air balloon and we're 20,000 feet in the air and it's your hot air balloon, are you allowed to throw me out of your hot air balloon? It's like I don't want to phrase questions. I want to have a reasonable dialogue where I'm not looking to straw man you or set bait and trap for you to fall into. I want to have a conversation.
Absolutely, Gary. Absolutely. I think we should do it. Basically, you say the question.
Okay.
They are your questions, right? Because otherwise, I feel like it'd be a lot of me talking.
Yeah.
And explaining stuff, and then you jumping in with like, you know.
Let me grab a pen.
Follow-up questions.
Take notes real quick.
Yeah, grab a pen, Gary. Take notes.
There you go.
I have a lot.
There we go. All right. See, I only did 8 because I knew 20 would go on forever. And if I do 20, they're all basically the same question, just worded differently. So I think I got, I could ask 20 questions, but it's going to be the same information.
And there's a few of these questions where like there's multiple questions within the question.
Yeah.
So, I just put 10 questions because it's a round number.
Sure.
It's good for the algorithms, right? But yes, 8 questions specifically, maybe more, maybe less. We're going to get into it.
Just to kind of give you a perspective, we'll say libertarian. That's fine.
Yeah,
I accept
don't
that.
Know you, of course.
Yeah,
libertarian.
Anarcho-capitalist, I think is better, but we'll put that in the greater umbrella under the libertarian umbrella, right? Like,
yes,
yeah.
Yes. And obviously, I'm a communist of the Communist Party USA, so it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be a good conversation. But Gary, how about you go with the first question?
All right. Why has the USA always used communist countries to be their fake enemies? The USSR, Cuba, China, Vietnam, etc. There are other types of governments equally as repressive, corrupt, violent, etc. that the USA doesn't make their fake enemies. And we say fake enemies. You guys know it. The USA doesn't really have any real enemies, right? It only has fake enemies, enemies it brings upon itself, right? We agree on that? Like, there's no country that really
that is
a for real enemy of the U.S. We just make fake enemies so we can have constant war to pay for the military-industrial complex.
I mean, we can probably get into it in a second, but like the idea of the economic threat to U.S. hegemony is absolutely real. I think in our lifetime, with what China's doing with BRICS, the Belt and Road Initiative, OPEC Plus, these are all massive steps away from U.S. economic hegemony. So
that doesn't make me your enemy, though, right? Like if I, you know what I'm saying? If we take the world away from the U.S. currency, that doesn't make me your enemy. Like we don't use Canadian currency. That doesn't make me an enemy of Canada, right? We just don't use their currency. These things, every enemy the U.S. has ever had, I think, is fake. It's not real. They're not a real enemy.
I will say that they are enemies to a certain class within the U.S., Gary. Maybe not to like the mass population of the U.S., where like China doesn't pose any sort of like realistic physical threat to the population of the United States.
And neither does Russia.
Of course not.
Those are our fake enemies.
But the reality is that they do pose a threat to the economic power and control of the U.S. ruling capitalist class. I think that.
Okay,
that is
sure. Yeah, I agree with that.
You are absolutely right that it is self-created in a sense, or that it's in a sense blowback, right? Like U.S. has been out there poking its nose everywhere, sticking its guns everywhere, and we've created enemies a lot of times in that sense. Fake, real. I understand what you're saying, but I do want to get to your question.
If I started an organization with me and all my friends who live near you, with the sole purpose of bringing you down, and then I call you my enemy, isn't that a little strange? Like, wouldn't that be a little like? Why does NATO exist?
NATO exists for the to basically attack Russia.
That's why it exists. That's why it exists.
Beforehand, yes.
And they're our enemy. We started an organization to bring them down, but they're our. It doesn't make any sense, right? Like, and why do we have NATO in 2023?
Let me get to your question, Gary.
All right, let's start with the questions.
I know you're happy here, Gary. I know. I would say that the communist countries like the ones you listed, of course, I would not classify them as repressive, corrupt, or violent per se, especially in comparison to Western bourgeois democracies, Western dictatorships, fascist dictatorships, or even sort of the neo-colonial comprador situation where we have dictators in global South countries, but they're in a sense puppets to foreign powers like the U.S., France, the U.K., Belgium, etc. Right? So that's why I sort of dismissed the question in a sense, because the framing of it automatically precludes that communist countries are repressive, corrupt, and violent, and I don't think that's the case.
My point was there are other countries all over the world, Europe, Eastern Europe, Africa, South America, the Middle East, that everything that the communist countries are portrayed of doing, there are other countries all over the globe who do that and or possibly worse. So why, my question was really, why did they pick communists to be their fake country, to be their fake enemy?
It's not, communism is not a fake enemy to capitalism. It's a very real threat to capitalism. For example, right, in pre-Russian Revolution, 1916, 1917, right, the Russo-Asiatic Steel Corporation was largely owned by a one J. Edgar Hoover, actually.
This was interesting. I'm going to let you go.
And if the Russian Revolution didn't happen, he actually would have been one of the richest men in the world. And obviously he went on after that, after the Russian Revolution, and after he lost his ownership to that corporation, due to the revolution, of course, that he became president, and then I think the first director of the FBI specifically. And he is quoted with saying, I might misquote it here, I don't have the actual quote in front of me, unfortunately, but Michael Prenti quotes this from his book Black Shirts and Reds, and also his lecture, it's called The Yellow Tape. That's how you can find it on YouTube. But digressing, that his goal in life was to strangle Bolshevism, communism, in its cradle. And obviously he spent a large part of his life going after communists. Now, obviously that's a very specific individual anecdote for why that one capitalist ruling class individual would hate communism, but it's reflective of the entire capitalist ruling class in the West. They had massive holdings in these countries, whether it be Tsarist Russia, semi-feudal China, Vietnam. These countries were largely owned by foreign capitalists. I forget the exact numbers. I'm sorry I don't have it up right now. But the industries of Tsarist Russia is somewhere between 50 to 80% were actually owned by foreign investors, foreign capitalists. So these countries were heavily colonized in that sense. So when they are launching revolutions and gaining sovereignty and self-determination, determining their own economic path, their own political path, and that is separate from Western capital control, that is a direct threat to their hegemony, their profit margins, their control over the world economy. So that's why we've seen the U.S., especially, obviously post World War II, especially, do this, because the U.S. is now the hegemonic imperialist capitalist power in the world. It's very clear that countries like the UK, France, and other ones, which used to be the more powerful capitalist countries than the U.S., they clearly are taking orders from the U.S. in large part in foreign policy determinations and in economic determinations. So that's why we see the U.S. constantly looking for this, to be quite honest. I have a clip, if you want me to play, from Philip Agee, who used to be in the CIA, and he gives a little 1 minute, 2 minute explanation of why the U.S. would do this.
That's from the horse's mouth. Let's hear it. Yeah.
Horses. All right, let me pull it up.
I can't hear this.
Oh, you can't hear it?
I can't hear it at all.
Oh no, it's doing that issue again. Damn it. I might not be able to play any of these videos. Damn it. No, Gary. Hold on 1 second. It's showing up there. Hold on. Let me see very quickly, Gary. I apologize, everyone. If I can't play it, I'll post in the chat so people can play it later. I do highly recommend it. And you're still not hearing it.
Are we live? Like live?
Yes, we're live.
Can they hear it? Can they hear it out there?
No. Unelectable Airwaves saying he can't hear it either. No,
Okay.
man, I've been having issues with that. Okay, I'll post in the chat. It's a 50-minute discussion. Here's one. Again, apologies there. But basically the idea of what I said, the idea of control, the idea of economic control, the idea of political control, and the idea that these people were now determining their own path, that's a direct threat to the U.S. government. Like you said, Gary, they're fake enemies in the sense that the U.S. population isn't under threat from these countries and communism in a sense, but the ruling class of this country absolutely is under threat of it.
I have no interest in it. The ruling class is under threat. I really, to me, I don't know. That sounds like a you problem to me.
But that's my answer to that question.
Okay.
I don't know if it answers it.
Yeah, the first two questions are just intake questions. I just want to hear your thoughts on it. They're not really debate questions. They're just intake questions for me.
Let's go to the next question then. Question number 2, Gary.
Is there a communist country in recent history that you think gets it right? As a libertarian, there's not one country that I would point at and say, yeah, they get liberty. Is there any country in recent history since the 20th century, so 1917 and on, that you think is a model of what communism should look like? So I'm asking, is there anyone that you would say that's what we should model ourselves? Not that it's absolutely perfect and there's no flaws, but that's a good model to shape ourselves after.
I think the quick answer is I think all of them present examples and lessons for how we should maybe implement it here. But that is with a huge caveat. How communism, socialism develops will be largely due to uneven geographical developments, right? For example, capitalism did not develop globally at the same time, at the same rate, right? Capitalism developed in England at a different rate than America, than France, than Mexico, than whatever country we want to talk about. So we have to understand that as well. That's a very key part of this. For example, China in 1949, when the CPC takes power, right, and proclaims People's Republic of China, their material conditions, what they were facing as a country, as a nation, is very different than what, say, we're facing right now in 2023 in the U.S. So if we were to gain power, if the Communist Party and the working class was to gain political and economic power in the U.S., would it look exactly like any of these? No. There might be elements to it. There might be similarities. There might be mirroring of policies and such across the spectrum of, USSR, China, Vietnam, Cuba, Nicaragua, etc. But I don't think any of them are and should be a blanket sort of blueprint to put over every other country. And other communists will say the same thing. If you talk to Stalin or Lenin, if we were to animate them from the dead right now, they would say the same thing, that how we can develop socialism and then eventually communism here is going to be different than how you develop it there. And to sort of list why I think on a spectrum, so to speak, that I can say that all of these experiments of socialism are successes, right? Even though they have setbacks, mistakes. As Engels said, the revolution moves in zigs and zags. So none of these are perfect. And I think that needs to be stated, that there was excesses within these revolutions, within these experiments. There was mistakes, like I said. But it, again, to quote a greater communist, Mao famously had, this work on Stalin after Stalin's death, when the Communist Party in the Soviet Union rejected Stalin to a large degree after his death. Mao came out and said, that's a mistake, actually. And he had this rule, and it's a long work, but I recommend people reading it, but basically comes down to 70-30. 70% of what Stalin did was very good, 30% of what he did was bad. And that is a general rule of thumb I have for socialist societies that are actually existing. That 70%, 30%, that there was mistakes. Yes. And if anyone wants to get into that, I'm glad to do that. But I feel like that's doing in part the business for the U.S. empire. I don't need to list the mistakes if I think the mistakes are lesser than the positives and the successes.
So that's how I view Ayn Rand. 70% of Ayn Rand is on the money. 30% is absolutely nuts, right? So, okay. What's your take on Ayn Rand? She came from a communist country and hates it.
I think Ayn Rand is a very poor theorist in terms of libertarian theory, so to speak. I think there are better ones out there than even her. As someone that used to be a libertarian, scary. I read Ayn Rand, but even when I was a libertarian, I wasn't like, oh, Ayn Rand, that's the one. It just and it never really spoke to me. And plus, I feel like the lack of analysis on capital exploitation, so to speak, even at a very young age, I was quite aware of that. So that's why I think I was drifting more towards a leftist anarchist position at first, before eventually becoming a communist. Where you are more of a, let's say, a right-wing anarchist, so to speak, right, Gary? Like libertarianism, anarcho-capitalism, more the right-wing spectrum of anarchism. Like a few of the successes I want to list off for actually existing socialist countries. Rapid industrialization surpasses the rates of growth of even capitalism. I know we talked about this, I think, on even a previous debate, Gary, a long time ago, that like the Soviet Union during the 1920s, 30s, and up to World War II, their average rate of growth, industrial rate of growth, is around 15%. And, if you look at the U.S. During peak industrialization, it was around 3%. If you look at, England during the Industrial Revolution, it's around 3 to 5% is the average. So the industrial rates of growth are just significantly different and more productive under socialist societies.
And how does that look when because Germany had massive economic growth up until World War II, but against inflation, it was really stagnant to what everyone else had.
Exactly.
So
because
when you say 15%.
Well, I mean, the Weimar Republic had superinflation, and it was a very struggling country. But you have to remember this, Gary. The Weimar Republic was also a social democratic republic that was deeply flawed, and most communists actually kind of reject it for a variety of reasons, most largely due to the SPD, the Socialist Democratic Party of Germany at the time, which became the leading party of the Weimar Republic in the interwar years. They suppressed a communist revolution in 1919, ended up assassinating and murdering communist leaders like Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht. So that's why communists kind of rejected the Weimar Republic. But a lot of their policies were socialist policies, because at that time, Gary, the Second International, as it was called, right, the successor to the First International, with Marx and Engels, Bakunin, who was an anarchist, and other anarchists, I think like Proudhon was originally a part of the International as well. But the Second International, which was the successor to it, the split of that was the Social Democrats versus the Communists. But it's in large part still influenced and inspired by Marx, Kautsky, Bernstein. They're the creators of that Euro socialism style. They're very much still inspired by Marx, even though it wasn't communism and it was not socialism, it's social democracy. But again, Germany was still a capitalist country that had superinflation, that created huge capitalist crises and economic crises that led to the rise of fascism, to be quite honest. So Germany did have great rates of growth, industrially speaking. Even before that, right, in the early 1900s, up until World War I, Germany becomes an industrial powerhouse in Europe. But if you look at the percentages, it's still not reaching the Soviet Union or reaching, let's say, China in the last 30 years, especially. Also, I have a bunch of other successes, so let me just rattle them off, Gary, and if you want, you can pick holes at them. Free access to healthcare and a greater focus on healthcare services innovation, rapid increase in education and literacy, often achieving 100% or near 100% literacy, often from backwards semi-feudal societies. Cuba is the only country in Latin America to eliminate child malnourishment, the lowest child death rate in Latin America, housing is a right, and have eliminated homelessness and developed 4 vaccines for cancer, to sort of speak on the innovation of healthcare. And these vaccines, one of them most famously for lung cancer, the U.S. Has an embargo against. So that's why we can't get these vaccines. The USSR raised life expectancy by 65% and increased real income by 370%. Housing, income, insurance, and medicine accounted for 15% of family income compared to 50% in the U.S. Eliminated homelessness and unemployment. A job was a guaranteed right, something that still is not here in the U.S. Healthcare was a right. Full literacy. Raised school enrollment by 460%. Secondary education was a right, and eliminated the gender pay gap. People's Republic of China under Mao increased life expectancy from 36 to 67, while the population doubled in size. Achieved 93% literacy from 20%. Universal free education and healthcare as a right. Both the USSR and PRC dismantled gross exploitative feudal class structures that had remained. I mean, this would be, in the sense of like when we talk about like feudal lords in like the 100 Years' War in Europe, right? Like that very much was still an existing class structure within Tsarist Russia and China at the time of their revolutions. And obviously, since Mao and the last 30 years, China has lifted 800 to 850 million people out of extreme poverty. And has eliminated extreme poverty in the country, and it's very close to eliminating poverty entirely. And I believe the mark they have for that is 2030 is when they will eliminate poverty completely within their country. Those are the few successes, I would say, of socialist countries. And again, there are mistakes, but these successes, I think, far outweigh the mistakes.
All right, so the first one I would pick at is free access to healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
Free. Okay, so what do you mean that it's free? Someone paid for it, right? Unless you think all the doctors, nurses, technicians, x-rays, techs, someone paid for it. Who paid for it?
The state.
So the state doesn't have any money unless what it steals from others. So what it stole from others is what's funding it, right? So if I take your money and then say you can then come to my house that I built with your money and get healthcare at my house, is that free?
Well, Gary, I would say that when you think of the state in the U.S. or another country, let's
I
say
could defend
England
that.
or France or whatever, when you think of the state in that sense, the state in China or the former USSR or Cuba is di- diametrically different than those states. How they are structured, how they are created, their inception, the support of the people, the actual, how should we say it, the participation, the political participation of people in these countries is far different than what we have here. So when I say, yeah, the state pays for it there, it's not an outside force demanding that. It is very much the masses of the people determining these policies.
So
For example, the Cuban Constitution, which has been rewritten a few times, but initially was drafted through, I forget the exact statistics, but it's like over 1,000 different local town meetings basically drafted the Constitution. It was a bottom up effort to create that document. For example, the recent um, family referendum in Cuba that basically now sets Cuba as the lead standard for LGBTQ plus rights. That was drafted again in a very similar fashion, where it was created, discussed, and debated through every town. And again, the political participation within those countries is just very different than what we have here, right? When let's say like a your local town council, right? It has, let's say, 10 people on the board, right? Or 10 people on the council, just for easy numbers here. In the US system, right? None of those 10 people then go up to the next rung of power, let's say the state assembly or state senate. And then none of those people go up to then the federal level, right? All those different elected bodies are divided and therefore bureaucratized, right? Like there's a bureaucracy that is now formed because the city, local, municipal elected body has no connection to the state elected body and then the federal elected body. That's very different in socialist countries where, let's say, again, those 10 people elected on the city council, right? Just to use that comparison. The vernacular is different, right, in socialist societies, but it's same thought. Um, 5 of those, half of them are now in the state council. And then this half of the state council goes to the federal assembly. So when you have the now federal assembly that's drafting a resolution for law or for amendment to the Constitution, those people are actually directly going back to their city hall, their city council, their town hall, so to speak, and they're directly held accountable by the people themselves. They're always held a recall. There's never periods where you can't recall an elected official in these countries. And usually the number you need to have to, let's say, recall someone is actually very low. It's actually less than the majority, because what it would do is then initial the, hey, we need to have an election, a re-election, so to speak. Does he really have or does she have the what would be the term? The confidence of the people, right? While in the U.S., the quotas to reach new amendments, new whatever, they're very, very high, in effect to also diminish majority will, right? Because let's say 51% of people think a policy should be implemented, right? You need now 67% of state senators or congressmen to actually vote on it, or you need a special convention, national convention, that needs to be approved by 3/4 of state assemblies. It becomes stopgaps to the will of the people. A lot of those stopgaps are actually removed in social societies because of that bottom-up structure. And on a personal level, I see it within the party. The Communist Party here in the U.S. the chair of our club, he's in the district exec. Half of the district exec is on national committees. And every 4 years, we have our National Assembly. And then pretty much every exec from the bottom up goes to it. So it's the proximity from those at the top to those on the bottom is drastically different. So I understand you thought of like, it's the state implementing it. It's an outside force, right? Because because our version of the state is determined by, it's ruled by a certain class, a minority class at that. You know, those that are like the Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Nancy Pelosi's, Joe Biden's of the world, that's a minority of the actual mass population of the U.S. You know, if the mass population of the U.S. had political and economic power and formed a state, but they had economic and political power, would it still be an outside force?
It's not that it's an outside force. It's that it's fundamentally theft. You're funding things with money that's not yours, right?
But if all of us agree we're going to fund this social program, so all of us have healthcare and housing,
then you don't need to say that's charity, right? I will grant you that if we all agree to it, right? But that's charity. Then it's not theft. Then it's charity. But what you're saying is that it's a state. It's what happens if I don't want to contribute? Like if I don't want to contribute to the Red Cross, if I don't want to contribute to St. Jude, I don't have to, right? What happens if I don't want to contribute to the state? What if I don't like what they're doing?
Well, you're getting ahead of yourself, Gary. That's not where we're at right now. That's another question, Gary.
All right, then I had two more. We'll get back to that one. But this is my fundamental issue with government as a whole. You said housing is a right.
Yes.
Okay. What if there's population growth and there's more people than houses?
You build houses.
But we're in the middle of New York, Midtown Manhattan. We're out of area. Who builds the houses?
There'd probably be public companies. That's what it would be. It would be.
Where do you get the money to build them?
Cooperatives. I mean, but Gary, you understand, like, we see it right now, right? For example, China, Cuba, Vietnam. Are they in housing crises where people don't have homes and they can't build enough homes for these people? Is that really an issue?
Not that I'm aware of, but I'm not that I know of. But
even in capitalist societies, that's not really an issue. It's forced scarcity.
Sure.
Right. We have enough homes. We have, I forget the exact number. It's like 1 to 2 million empty homes right now in the U.S. And a habitual population of 500,000 people that are homeless.
That's because BlackRock owns every new build in the country, and they just Airbnb them and buy out so regular people. Like I bought this house 7 years ago. 7 years ago, I bought it for $280,000. Same neighborhood, nothing's changed in my home, right? The house is the same, the neighborhood is the same. Now the house is worth $500,000. That's only because BlackRock bought up everything in sight. Right, so there's just less houses, so they got to either keep building houses like they do in Florida. And I used to live like on the cut of the country, and it was kind of nice. Now there's crap all around it. That's besides the point. Like I got a Facebook office building that's like 3 miles long down the road from my house. Like I lived in the country 4 years ago. Now there's Facebook. There's Charles Schwab has a entire university on like 50 acres by where I live. But that's besides the point. I don't even know where I'm getting with that, right? Yeah. But if housing is a right, you need to enforce someone to buy it. I mean, someone to build it, right?
Well,
what if someone wants to? What I'm getting at is, how do you have the right to something someone else has to build?
But Gary, did you personally build your house?
No, I voluntarily paid someone to do it.
Okay, these people are working for a job to build a house
with money that comes from who? I don't have a right to this house. I mean, I do now because I own it, but I didn't have a right to something that I don't have the right to someone else's labor unless
Gary,
I sign a contract with them.
You understand like commerce still exists, right?
I understand commerce still exists, but you're saying housing is a right. How do you have the right to something else someone else has to build? You're dependent on them to build that thing. If you're dependent on someone else to do something, how do you have a right to their labor?
I honestly, I really don't follow, because to me, it doesn't seem that complicated. You know, we already have it in a capitalist system where there's a market to build houses, right?
That's a voluntary. You don't have a right to a house. You negotiate either with someone to buy a house
you're
or
absolutely
to
right.
build.
People have the freedom to be homeless. You are absolutely right in the U.S.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. If you don't want a house, Gary, in China, you can be on the streets if you want. No one's like forcing you at gunpoint to go into a home.
What I'm saying is, if you have a right to something, right? Like, I don't think you have a right to any material object, right? Because a material object implies that someone else it's the product of someone else's labor. You can acquire it voluntarily, but you don't have a right to someone else's labor. And you're saying, in order for me to have a house, someone else has to be put to work to buy it. Well, what if no one wants to be put to work to buy it? How do I have a right to it?
Gary, when that happens, we can talk about that, but that just doesn't happen. So I mean, like, you're asking a question about, like, what happens if the sky turns red with fire? It's like, well, that's not happening. So like, I don't think I need to worry about it. You know, like, that's not a real issue. So I don't feel like it's a thing I need to answer for. You understand what I'm saying? Because there's no mass movement in Cuba, China, of construction workers being like, we don't want to build houses for people anymore, freeloaders. It's like, that doesn't exist.
It's not a matter of freeloaders. Like, what if there becomes a more lucrative business than building houses? And now I don't have people who don't want to don't want to build a house anymore because they're off building condos, or they're off building tanks, or they're off building something else. Now I don't have people to build a house, but I still have a right. I don't understand how you fundamentally have a right to something else someone else has to provide. That's my. A
society is full of that, where we have mass-produced food that you don't actually grow.
I don't have a right to food. I don't have a right to food. I can buy food.
Eric, I'm not talking about, like, look. It exists, right? People have a need for food. We now have mass urbanization, right? We have mass population centers, right? Where we have food deserts. So food has to be produced and then imported into other places a lot of times, right? That's just a material necessity. And on top of it, people, human beings as like a species, they need food and shelter to survive. So a society, because that's now what we are, right? We're not just we're not just individuals walking around. We are now a collective society that shapes and influences others through a variety of ways, some indirect and some direct, right? But that society now has a responsibility to itself to make sure it improves, progresses, and is healthy, right? Just like people have a responsibility to themselves to make sure they improve, they're healthy. Like, if you're not healthy, you die. Same with the society. If society is not healthy, it dies, right? If a community is not healthy, if it does not have food production, if it does not have housing, shelter, it dies. So these are just basic necessities. And rights should be a way to fill our basic necessities, right? Let alone the ethical rights that are not enshrined anywhere in particular, but we determine them through our consciousness, right? You know, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, those things, right? But the reality is that people need shelter. So that's never going to be a thing that goes out. There will always be people, new people that are born, that need homes, that need apartments, that need shelter to live. That's just the reality. So I just don't see in history where that has been the case, where all of a sudden the rate of housing building is now smaller than the rate of population growth. Like it just doesn't exist really. We haven't seen that.
It's the greater point that I'm trying to get at is that you can't have the right to someone else's labor. Right. And in order to have houses, someone has to build those houses. Someone has to put a roof on those houses. Someone has to do the electrical work. And I'm assuming these houses are all going to have electricity, right? Someone has to provide all of those
Do you think
things.
they're doing it for free?
That takes me back to the first point, is that now you're conscripting people to build these houses, right? So with money that's not yours. So you're taking other people's money to build you a house. I don't understand fundamentally how you have a right to someone else's labor and someone else's money to pay for that labor.
But Gary, money in and of itself is something that's created from a society entirely. Like individuals don't create individual currencies. That's not real.
If you want to get back to the gold standard, I think we may agree on some of that. Okay, I agree with you. Money is fake. I agree with that. Government fiat currency is a government invention, right? We used to have precious metals. We used to have gold. Your money used to be something. Now it's just whatever government tells you it is. I fundamentally oppose that too. I think if that's the system we're going to go with, that's a horrible system.
Again, Gary, you know this, right? Because we've had multiple debates where I feel like I've explained this process, right? Where you use socialism and communism interchangeably, but those are different words.
I haven't used anything. But go ahead.
No. But like when you say communist countries like USSR, Cuba, Vietnam, etc., those countries are not communist countries. Those are socialist countries that have often a ruling communist party, usually in a coalition of parties at the head of the government, right? So there is a difference to that. I don't know if I lost him here. Gary? He froze out of fear. That's what the fear of communism does to people sometimes. I don't know. Oh, Gary's back. No, he's not. He's gone forever. No, he'll be back. Unelectable Airwaves. Shout out to you, man. I hope you guys are doing well. I tried watching one of your streams the other day, but you guys start so late. God. Hey, I love Gary. I love Gary. He's back. He's just it's libertarian stuff. I know it. Trust me. Like we're into the non-aggression principle. God, man, like I can't wait. I can't wait. But Gary,
we're already 40 minutes in. Like we haven't even gotten to the meat. I just gave you the two, like I said, intake questions where I could kind of pick your brain.
Know, Gary, the next question's like the doozy.
The next one's like an hour long in and of itself, right? And yeah, I did some good research on this, and I donate to a charity called Billion Bibles, and of all the communist countries, Cuba is actually the most friendly to Christians. I learned that.
That's not true.
Well, let's get into it. I'll read the next question.
One, they're all friendly to Christians, Gary. But
we're gonna get into that.
Do you want to say the question? Because it's a long question. And just go, Gary. Go for the question.
Okay. Why is communism so hostile towards Christians? One communist country after another has atrocities towards Christians. Do you want me to get into all the details? Do you want me to read the whole thing?
I mean, I might reference it if that's okay in my answer.
Okay.
If you don't want to go through the whole thing, I understand that. Because you give a lot of examples. So yeah, you don't have to, because there might be some I reference though. So you know what I'm talking about at least.
Okay.
I will say up front that I think this question is like completely off base for a variety of reasons. For example, one of the examples you use is the Tianjin massacre. The Tianjin massacre happened in 1870, and that was 80 years before the CPC gained power in China and 50 years before the CPC was even created.
Fair point. I didn't even think of that when I asked the question. That's a fair point. That's a fair point. I didn't even think of that.
I do wonder about your research, Gary. I do think maybe you just went to Wikipedia and went like Chinese atrocities against Christians, and like you're like, oh man.
No, I've had these for years. Like these,
Oh,
this
okay.
is not new material I came up with this past week.
Okay.
No, that's a fair point. You're right. I didn't even consider. I just yeah, that's a fair
Like
point.
I don't know how we can blame
Fair
communists
enough.
for
Fair
that
enough.
one. But anyways, where am I at? Because I wrote a lot, so I might if I start reading and it gets dry, Gary, just don't be afraid to cut in here. And also like I know personally of churches that have gone to China, churches that have gone to Cuba, Christians that have gone to these countries, and nothing of what you're reporting and what I know other NGOs have reported and think tanks have reported of repression against Christians, especially in China, because obviously China is like the huge one. But you mentioned Cuba, which I'll get into because I feel like that was really that I want to know where you got that, Gary, to be quite honest, because I haven't seen anything like that in all my research and my personal direct and indirect experience with the island. Like it's that's just not the case. And again, like I know of churches that are big mega church corporations, right, that I don't like. And I know Gary probably doesn't like to some degree, right, in terms of how they've commodified, right, the religion, so to speak. But they go and have churches in China without state repression of any sort. And I've even had pastors come back and I know from my partner and such that like they've said nothing but great things about China and actually want to move back to the country. So the idea that China's like deeply repressing Christians, and all my personal experience, that's not the case. The idea of Cuba saying that Christians are a disease, like that's I don't know where that comes from. I've never seen that before. But let's tackle that first aspect, the hostility towards Christians, right? The idea that communism itself is hostile towards Christians. I think that largely comes from Karl Marx and his opinions about the Catholic Church and wanting the abolition of organized religion in that sense. Never, by the way, for the idea of the elimination of spirituality or personal faith at all, but just the idea of banning the Catholic Church. That was very much a Karl Marx idea because his own family was forced to convert from Judaism to Christianity. So he had very negative viewpoints of Protestantism and Catholicism. But communists and socialists actually in many parts of the world have been very much Christian. I don't know if Gary is quite aware of what's called liberation theology. But this was a Christian theology that was developed, I want to say, after there was this massive meeting of bishops and archbishops like in 1968, I believe, in Medellin, Colombia, if I'm accurate there. And they basically had this referendum or statement that prioritizes the poor. The idea of we as a faith, we as a church, we as a society need to uplift the poor. And Gustavo Gutierrez is his name. I highly recommend people read his work, A Theology of Liberation, History, Politics, and Salvation. You can read it for free on archive.org. I'll post it in the chat for anyone. Highly recommend it. And also for archive.org, for those who don't know, you can basically borrow PDFs for 2 weeks and just have a free account. Doesn't charge you anything. Very, very convenient. But anyways, this basically took hold over all socialist and communist movements, especially Latin America. Cuba for one, but especially the Sandinistas. The Sandinistas, quote from, let me get the National Directorate of the FSLN, published October 7th, 1980. Christian patriots and revolutionaries are an integral part of the Sandinista People's Revolution, and they have been for many years. The participation of Christians, both lay people and clergy, in the FSLN and the government of national reconstruction is a logical outgrowth of their outstanding participation at the people's side throughout the struggle against the dictatorship. And there's more works in this work. Sandinista Speaks has created curated, so to speak, by one of the founders of the Sandinistas. Highly recommend that one as well. I'll post in the chat. But this idea that communists are antithetical to religion or to Christianity, I think it's just not accurate when we see it in practice, especially even in our own country, Gary. I know you're probably not aware of this, but in large part, the Chicano movement, the Latin demographics and their struggle for political and economic determination in this country is in large part founded under liberation theology. One of our veteran party members, a mentor of mine, one of the founders of the Chicano moratorium movement here in LA in 1970, he himself has an office in a church, that's his little communist office. So my own personal experience, from what I know of the Sandinistas, especially, the idea that Christians aren't accepted in this movement is just not true. I also have a bunch of other things I just want to rattle off here, if that's okay. Freedom of religion has been a right in every socialist society. In Cuba's constitution, Article 55, the state which recognizes, respects, and guarantees freedom of conscience and religion simultaneously recognizes, respects, and guarantees the freedom of every citizen to change religious creeds or not to have any, and to profess the religious worship of their choice with respect for the law. Article 124 of the USSR 1936 Constitution, which is often called Stalin's Constitution. Obviously, Stalin being the big bad boogeyman. In order to ensure to citizens freedom of conscience, the church in the USSR is separated from the state and the school from the church. Freedom of religious worship and freedom of anti-religious propaganda is recognized for all citizens. Article 36 of the People's Republic of China's Constitution. Citizens of the People's Republic of China enjoy freedom of religious belief. No state, organ, public organization, or individual may compel citizens to believe in or not to believe in any religion, nor may they discriminate against citizens who believe in or do not believe in any religion. The state protects normal religious activities. No one may make use of religion to engage in activities that disrupt public order, impair the health of citizens, or interfere with the educational system of the state. Religious bodies and religious affairs are not subject to any foreign domination. It's also important to understand the church. And I'm going to use that in a capital C sense, Gary, so you can understand the organized Christian church, whether it be Catholic, Eastern, Orthodox, Baptist, whatever, right? Not the idea of the colloquial the Church of God is the people, right? The Christian masses. I'm not using it in that sense. The church is often viewed in these places in a negative light, often because of colonialism. For example, in China, Cuba, Nicaragua, even though those places obviously have liberation theology as a foundation, I can understand why there would be any sort of animosity towards an organized religion that, in one hand, and the Western colonial powers in the other, enslaved them, enslaved the native population, erased the native religions there as well, erased the native African religions that they used for the transatlantic slavery. And let's not forget that the church, the Catholic Church, was the one that requested the start of the transatlantic slave trade. It wasn't Spain, it wasn't England, it was the Catholic Church that demanded it, actually. That any sort of animosity they have towards that, I understand to a degree. Similar to in Russia, right? You may not understand it, but the Russian Orthodox Church was very much also a feudal lord in a sense, similar to the idea that the Pope at one time was the largest landowner in Europe, right, Gary? The Russian Orthodox Church was one of the largest landowners in Tsarist Russia, was heavily involved in serfdom, which is a deeply exploitative and oppressive class structure. And also the church was heavily involved with the what we call it, the increase of anti-Semitism at the time. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which was created in conjunction with Russian Orthodox Church. And so that wave of anti-Jewish pogroms that hit Tsarist Russia that killed really an untold amount. We really don't have a consensus about how many people died during those programs in the early 1900s and late 1800s. But the Russian Orthodox Church was very much a key figure for that happening. So when you have the serfs, the masses rise up, I can see why there's animosity towards not a religion, but a landowner, a lord, a feudal lord, because that's in effect what they were. I do also want to point out just maybe more of like a point of not hypocrisy, so to speak, but the idea that organized churches, especially mega church corporations, should just get carte blanche where they go. The Hillsong United documentary just came out. Watched that last night. We're talking about a massive multi-billion-dollar corporation that has a front of a church that the owners are handed down via nepotism, and they use the parishioners' money to go on private jets, to buy Cartier watches, let alone the sexual abuse that goes on, let alone the Catholic Church that had and still probably has issues of sexual abuse, right?
Can I just chime in real quick? If you want to sit here and kind of bash the Catholic Church, we can do that together.
I know,
like,
Gary.
I'd be glad to join you in that, right? Like, you keep saying the Catholic, yeah, no, I agree, and that's why it has nothing to do with Christ. I agree with you. I'm with you 100%.
But for this point, we should separate the two, because the Cuban communists or the Russian communists or whoever we're talking about, they have very different views on what, especially in Latin America, they call Comrade Jesus, compared to the organized corporate front, so to speak, of we have these mega churches, right? And the Catholic Church is like the mega of mega churches. I know you're not a fan of them. I know you're more of the at-home Bible book study type. I get that completely, Gary.
Well, in Texas, have you been to North Texas?
Of course.
We have churches.
Amarillo.
Well, no, North Texas is that's West Texas. It doesn't make any sense. That's West Texas, and that makes. I know it's the northernmost part of Texas. That's not North Texas. That's West Texas. I know it makes no sense. North Texas is where I live, the DFW Metroplex, right? And its surrounding areas. And I know that's east, but whatever. We have mega churches, but even like our non-mega churches are still like mega churches compared to what most of the country has, right? Like, if you go to South, like there's Gateway, right? And Pastor Morris is on TV. He's got 20 campuses and the average attendance of 20,000 people per week, right? 30,000 people per week. I mean, my church is nowhere near that size, but like the average attendance is still like 2,500 people, which is still technically a mega church. I just want to put that out there. So when I say I have 2,500 people in my church, someone in a small church in Indiana or Iowa might be like, well, that's a massive church. It is, but not in Texas.
That's true. Quickly, because I have a lot more points here. So for this answer,
so you're saying I listed. If you look at the private chat, I linked where it says from the worldwatchmonitor.org.
If possible, I'll probably off air comment on that link, because just like the one you sent in the question that I didn't read off, China Aid, like I did research on that source, so to speak, to have an opinion about it. So for that one, I'll wait to play off air, research it, and develop opinion on that source in particular.
So I was just gonna run through it. So the millions of atrocities, right? Like I can just one
Gary,
citation.
Gary, for example, the 12 to 20 million, like I do want to touch on why I think these numbers are not accurate. And it involves going in depth on a few examples, if that's okay with you. Okay, Gary, follow along here. Okay, I just strap in, man. Get a drink or something. Okay. Also, just want to point out China Aid, right? Its headquarters is right next to the White House, actually. Their founder was involved in the Tiananmen Square situation, which in of itself is a thing that's falsely reported on in the West. I'll post a link to that topic in particular here in the chat that I recommend people read. And obviously, you give it a chance when you can. Because that's another example of what I'm going to go through with these other ones of why numbers and information and facts we're told here in the West about these countries are just simply not true. But let's get into it. A few examples of how the U.S. manufactures consent against social societies, the Uyghur genocide myth. The claim that China is oppressing millions of Muslim minorities, the Uyghur ethnic population. Also, in terms of Gary's overall question, not Christians, but a religious group. So I feel like it does overlap in that sense of religious freedom. The two sources for that myth come from one by a U.S. government-funded and backed NGO called the Network of Chinese Human Rights Defenders. And the second one is from Adrian Zenz of the U.S. government-created Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation. I just want to point that out. The first study by that NGO I named, the Network of Chinese Human Rights Defenders, it extrapolated from 8 interviews, anonymous interviews, in the Xinjiang Autonomous Region, this number of 1 million to 2 million people in prison. There's no other methodology attached to it. It's just extrapolating that this person represented a population municipal size of this. They said they had this many people in prison. We're going to jump that up. And that is it for that one. Adrian Zenz, who also is a far-right fundamentalist Christian, not in the same vein as you, Gary, don't worry. He opposes homosexuality and gender equality, and believes he is, quote, led by God, end quote, on a mission against China. So we're dealing with suspect sources, so to speak. And that is a common thread when it comes to Western propaganda against communist countries. Let me see right here. Adrian Zenz, his initial report on China and the Uyghur situation was initially published at the Jamestown Foundation, which is a notorious neoconservative think tank founded by the Ronald Reagan administration and funded by the CIA through the National Endowment for Democracy.
It was funded by the CIA?
Yes.
Really?
Jamestown Foundation is funded by the NED, which obviously the National Endowment for Democracy has been a known outlet for the CIA to funnel money. And he also based his report on a single TV report from a Uyghur exile in Turkey and is republished by Newsweek Japan. That is actually the crux of it, and birth rates. He used birth rates and the decline of birth rates as evidence for people being exterminated. I think anyone with clear minds would go, maybe we should look more into that. I don't think we should absolutely determine that China has imprisoned 1 to 2 million people, is killing a minority group and committing genocide off of 8 anonymous interviews and 1 TV report from institutions that are directly created and funded by the U.S. I think people should be skeptical of that.
Let me kind of summarize my question, right? Look, if there's anything I don't buy, it's anything that comes from the CIA. So you actually won me over on that. Like, I'm actually going to look into that now, right? Like, I thought, okay, what is this? Just a giant conspiracy from this? Maybe it is. If it comes from the CIA, who literally coined the phrase conspiracy theory, right? Came from them. But so my question is, so like, let's take China for example. China has two Christian churches that are approved. One's a Catholic church, and the other is something I guess you would call a Protestant church, called the Three Self-Patriotic Movement, right? And then there's a Catholic church as well, and they have to be approved. You're saying none of this is true?
No, because I mean I know of churches that have churches there, like huge.
But there are two branches of those churches, right? Like there's not
no. Separate from that. That's what I'm saying. I don't see that. I mean, I know of personal experiences. You know, I have people that I know that have personal experiences that's not the case. I mean, I can give you a pastor's number that lived there if you wanted. I mean, like it's just not the case, Gary.
Can you have a message me? I'm genuinely. I mean, we have to do this now. I would actually like to have a conversation with him. Just.
And I mean, this pastor, I'm assuming, is probably not going to be a communist. I'm probably more of a conservative in worldview, probably closer to you.
Is he from here, or is he just pastor, or where is he
yes,
from?
From here.
From LA.
From here.
Yeah.
Yes. We're from the
US.
California area.
California.
From the US. From New Mexico? New Mexico.
That's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, he was in China for 10 years.
So then you're going to say the underground church was somewhere, roughly estimate that there may be more Christians in China than there are in America. I think
it's all bogus, because look,
I'm not saying you're wrong. I don't trust anything that comes from the U.S. government, but I need to see it. I need to, like, if you're saying everything I'm reading is wrong, maybe, right? Maybe, but I need to see it.
For example, we have the Falun Gong cult, right? Falun and Gong Gong. They're funded by the U.S. government. If you ever see the Shen Yun posters for China before communism and that like play or musical, whatever it is, right? That's them. That's their play. You know, they have received repression from the Chinese government, but they're also like a death cult. Like it's close to like Heaven's Gate sort of weird shit. Like we do get that, and we also get China going after fraud and corruption, right? So for example, let's say that you have a Catholic church or another church that's in China, right? And they're committing fraud, embezzlement, whatever, right? Or sexual abuse, whatever it is, right? In the US, what happens? Nothing. In China, they probably go to prison. Like that's, I mean, honestly, I know you're not a fan of prisons, Gary. I understand why. I get that. But that type of, I wouldn't call that repression. For example, when we hear the idea of like China repressing businesses, it's because they're arresting like fraudulent CEOs that are like embezzling like millions of dollars from their customers and their employees. And China goes, boom, you're going to jail. When in the US, that doesn't happen. And guess what? The US sends them a golden parachute of a stimulus check. So I just think this is in large part projection as well, and large part fabrication. Because if we look at what system, what society has actually been the most responsible for oppressing religious freedom and actually erasing religions, it's been Western European powers. I mean, entire native religions, cultures, languages are just wiped out. We should put that in comparison. You know, when we talk about the transatlantic slavery, that's also attack against an indigenous, religious, ethnic groups as well. Their native religions have been destroyed. No one that's a descendant of slaves now is celebrating the same religion that their ancestors did before those slave ships came, because there's been a disconnect. There's been a break from that. So I again, I see it large part just being fabricated. You know, for the 12 to 20 million for the Soviet Union, for example, we're getting into weird shit here where I have a big example for, and I use the Ukrainian famine as that example, as to why the numbers we're getting for that type of situation is fabricated, is created, especially originally through a alliance with the Hearst media and Nazi Germany. Like on paper relationship, William Randolph Hearst flew to Nazi Germany, met with Adolf Hitler, signed a deal to be the sole purveyor of international news for Nazi Germany. And then the next year, he has a guy lie about his name, travel to Moscow, and then lie about going to Ukraine and saying that a famine happened. A year or two after an actual famine happened, but for very different reasons, which I can get into. But again, it's a long story. But that number gets repeated and it gets sourced and cited, and it's never corrected. So Robert Conquest, when he does Harvest of Sorrow, we have all those, Black Book of Communism. Those numbers we're getting are large part fabricated. They're using birth rate drops. They're using actual Nazi soldier deaths. When we talk about Soviet, the amount of people killed by the Soviet Union, the Black Book of Communism, Harvest of Sorrow, all those stuff, they use actual Nazi deaths as a part of their methodology. Those are the victims of communism, are Nazi soldiers. So the methodology for a lot of this is just all over the place.
So if it's not 12 to 20 and it's half that, does it really, if it's 6 to 10 million, does it really change the topic of the conversation?
I can show you where it's not just half. We're talking about like a 90% difference. We're talking about a 95% difference, or a full-on fabrication of it, so to speak. For example, the idea of 12 to 20 million Christians, are they including Nazi soldiers as Christians and as victims of that?
Well, soldiers you can't count because a war is a war, right? You can't count that.
Me and you can't, but the Black Book of Communism, Robert Conquest, those authors that have created those numbers that we now just repeat in the West, they did use that. They did. Or like, for example, in Ukraine, right before this all happened, there was a change in the jurisdiction, so to speak, right? So 2 to 3 million Eastern Ukrainians were now in the Russian Soviet Republic. So they now got retabulated in the Russian population consensus. That gets added as deaths under communism. But it's not. It's just a change in the census. So we're dealing with stuff like that is that fabricated, Gary. And if I want to recommend some books, I know I probably can't go into it all, but Another View of Stalin, Fraud, Famine, and Fascism. Where is it at? By Douglas Tottle. That's just about the Ukrainian famine, if you just want to do a deep dive on that. And again, PDFs for all of these you can find. Stalin, History and Critique of a Black Legend. They go in and clearly show that this is fabrication. And on top of it, academia now, Western academia, no longer agrees that the Ukrainian famine was manufactured and an act of extermination against Ukrainians by Stalin's regime. Like, modern academia now rejects actually the academia that came out during the Reagan administration, when he paid for this stuff to be reprinted and republished. So when we talk about these statistics that you put in the question of, 12 to 20 million Christians were killed and persecuted in the Soviet Union, I don't believe it. I need to see where that number is coming from, to be honest. Same like look, Gary, no following you on, but you put the Tianjin massacre. That happened in 1870.
It's fair enough. Yeah.
To point out the Ukrainian famine, Thomas Walker was the reporter's name that lied about his name. His actual name was Robert Greene. That worked for William Randolph Hearst, worked for the Nazi regime, that created the first report on a Ukrainian famine and genocide. He put pictures as proof of this famine from a famine that happened in 1922, from World War I, from events that did not happen either in Ukraine or at that time. So I know there's a mistake on your part, but that's been an intentional mistake to sort of paint these other atrocities as atrocities of communists.
I'm not disregarding what you're saying. I'm not. Like, when you want to make a fake enemy, propaganda is something you have to do, right? You've kind of I'm not saying I'm 100% going to swear off of what you said about the Uyghurs, but that's interesting, right? You've given me something now to look into, right?
I sent you my notes, and in my notes I have links for that, Gary.
Okay.
So if you want to do more research, there's some links that can get you started in the right direction.
And additionally, right, because Russia, you can be a Christian in Russia today. That's not an issue, right? That's not an issue. Not that I know of. It's not an issue. China was really the one I wanted to get into. You're just saying evangelizing outside isn't illegal. It's not illegal. And I'm going to say most Christians, the overwhelming majority of Christians, upward of over 90%, meet in house churches because they can't meet in buildings. That's not true. You're saying all of that's not true.
No, I would say that's definitely not true. I would
And
say
if you take a child under 18 to church, that's not, you don't get arrested for brainwashing a minor.
No.
I'm telling you what. Again, I don't live there. I've never been to China. I'm just telling you. I can source everything. I'm showing you. You're saying that it's all propaganda.
Yeah, I mean, that pastor I talked about, he brought his whole family there for 10 years. He raised kids there in the church. So
and not one of the two churches that the government sponsors.
No.
Does the government sponsor only two churches?
I've never heard of that, Gary. I'm not saying maybe it's in the sense that, well, no, they don't sponsor anything. The idea of the state sponsoring a church or religion doesn't exist.
Well, in order to have a church built, right, you have to.
The only religion, so to speak, it's not even a religion, that's outlawed that I know of in China is Falun Gong. And even then, it's like hit or miss. Like, I don't think it's like you go in prison for that. I just think like you can't like organize, like you can't go and like demonstrate. But that's because they view it as a death cult that's led to like people committing suicide. So it's like that's the only case of it that I know of. Then we talk about like religious persecution, and then it's like there was like cases of like peasants rising up and like burning a church in the Soviet Union. That absolutely happened. But I'm not going to fault angry peasants that after centuries of exploitation and oppression by that same organized church. I don't fault them for that. I really don't. Same for
so
like
the videos in China that circulate, right, like with 200 people worshiping in a garage, right, because it's the only place they can gather. You're saying that that's all staged. That's propaganda pieces,
or it's like it's mischaracterized, right? Like
could be.
I bet it's just a like garage church, you know, and then a person put in fake subtitles or fake description of what it is, and it doesn't match it. I've seen that also a lot too, you know, when it comes to like other things, when it comes to, oh, these workers are calling for the downfall of Xi Jinping. It's like, no, they were calling for like better wages. It's like,
and the other thing is Xi Jinping makes himself the center of those two churches that we mentioned. That's not real either.
No.
It could be propaganda. I'm not saying that you're wrong, but I need to see that, right? Like I need to see that. Otherwise, like there's bigger scandals going on, right?
Gary, you are one that believes the moon landing was faked by this.
I'm willing to believe anything my government tells me is a lie. I'm willing to believe that.
So remember, you're seeing all this information come through like mega corporations and like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, by Facebook. Like you're seeing a lot of this information be filtered through these people that have a direct interest in like China not doing well. Like China's tech industry is far surpassing the US. There's a reason why like TikTok, which is so villainized in the US, even though it does largely the same stuff in terms of like data surveillance, not surveillance, but data extraction for advertisers and stuff, right? Like it does that just like Instagram, Facebook, and everyone else does. So the idea that TikTok is more dangerous than Instagram, no, it's not. But one's US owned and one's not US owned. Like that's the major difference.
I never understood. Well, I understand it. I do understand it, but I never understood why the assault on TikTok compared to Facebook, Instagram, right? And yeah, obviously the capabilities of TikTok are far superior to Twitter.
But Gary, important question. Shout out to Ross Public on the chat. good friend of the show, saying, what convinced you in the first place to believe these things? Like, for example, when we list like the idea that like China banning Christianity, blah blah blah, like I'm saying that's not true. You're saying that is true. What made you lead to believing that is the case?
Multiple sources reported it.
But
right.
But that's when we get into the sourcing of it, right? Just because a website says something or a NGO says something, we have to look into that, right? For example, Jonestown Foundation is an NGO. It's a non-governmental organization. It's funded by the NED, which is an outlet for the CIA. It's a neoconservative think tank that was created by the Ronald Reagan administration. China Aid, which is the one that I saw you cite, and the only one I saw you cite for China, right? Its headquarters is literally next door. Like, not like down the street or in the same city as the White House. It's next door to the White House.
But that's just a genetic fallacy. That doesn't mean what they report is fake.
But Gary, Washington, D.C. is the hub of the U.S. State Department, the military industrial complex, the CIA, the NSA, the FBI. And you think an organization that's parroting, a non-governmental organization that is parroting the U.S.'s propaganda against its fake enemy and happens to be right next to the White House is just a pure coincidence?
No,
and on its board is former U.S. congressmen. You have people from other think tanks like the George H. Bush Institute as the board of directors. So these are people that aren't on the outside of the government. These are people that are absolutely on the inside of the ruling elite of Washington, D.C.
I'm not saying that is wrong. I'm also not saying he's correct, right? I'm saying he kind of convinced, on the Uyghur thing, he makes a lot of sense. Again, it is what it is. I don't know. What I'm saying is it made a lot of sense. I've heard the Uyghur reports just like everyone else has. I've never really looked into them. I'm not a Muslim. Maybe if I was, it would not, be a little closer to home. I'm a Christian, right? So when I see these things and I see charities donate to the Christians in China, help Christians in the underground church, and then you see these stories and you see the videos of 200 people in a garage for 3 hours worshiping together, and Matt saying all of that is a propaganda video. Perhaps he's correct, right? Perhaps he is. Again, when you make a fake enemy, propaganda is going to be a big part of making a fake enemy. Maybe he's correct, but I need to see. I need to see why this is incorrect, and this is just something that the government or someone else made up to make you hate China.
I need to see why it is correct as well, because I've not seen why it is correct. Again. So, yes, Gary.
When you go outside and you see a news story, old lady struck by a motorized cart and is in the hospital, you assume that story is fake?
Gary, come on, let's be real about this, right? There are certain reports that the capitalist class, the U.S. government, has a more vested interest in, right? One, the lady that gets struck by lightning on her bike, that has no societal bearing, there's no class bearing, it has no bearing on economic or political policy.
But you don't go to the hospital, you don't check and see this lady in here, did she check? You accept the, especially if more than one source reports it, you kind of accept it to be true, right?
But
you don't go to the hospital and ask for this lady what room is she in and check her story.
Why would the U.S. government have a bias to fake that? I know why the U.S. government has a bias, which I answered in the first question, if you remember, why they would have a vested interest in bringing down socialist countries. And we've seen it. Gulf of Tonkin, for example, which was a fabrication, which led to the Vietnam War or escalation of the Vietnam War, I should say.
See, we can get together on these conspiracies, right? I say Gulf of Tonkin, and people look at me like I got 5 heads.
But what's so different than a Uyghur genocide myth?
I'm not disregarding what you're saying. I'm not disregarding what you're saying. I'm saying I can't go full-fledged into belief because Matt told me so, right? But I'm not disregarding what you're saying. Like on paper, yes, what you say might make a lot of sense. It might not be wrong.
Remember the Maine? Was that Havana? Was that the Spanish-American War? Remember the Maine when the ship burned on its own in Havana Harbor, and we use that as justification for going to war with Spain and colonizing the Philippines and Cuba. I mean, the U.S. has a long track record of just lying to manufacture war consent. Another few pieces of evidence for the Uyghurs, just to point out. And again, I think this is directly connected to the idea of like Chinese repression against Christianity. If communists were just anti-religious, then these two stories would be true. But if they're not anti-religious, these two stories would be false, right? So if one's false, I think it leads more credence to the fact that the other one's probably false as well. The Uyghur population increased from 10 million to 12.7 million, 25% increase in the last 8 years. The CPC and the People's Republic of China has largely invested in actually infrastructure for the Uyghur Muslim population and creating 25,000 plus mosques just in Xinjiang Autonomous Region alone. Not in all China, just in that one region, there's 25,000 mosques that have been built. And that's largely been built since the 1980s as well. For example, in the U.S., I think the total amount of mosques in the U.S. is around 3,000. Also, where is it at? Oh, I just lost it. The poverty alleviation efforts resulted in 3 million people, 3 million Uyghurs being lifted out of poverty in the last decade. At the time of this report, shout out to the Friends of Socialist China, there have been 0 COVID-19 deaths in Xinjiang, population of 26 million. Diplomats from Palestine, Iran, Pakistan, Nepal, and elsewhere, all Muslim majority countries, actually sent international delegations and investigators to see what was happening. And they all concluded that this wasn't happening, that there was no Uyghur genocide or cultural genocide as it was downshifted to after the claims of actual genocide were clearly not true. Then became a cultural genocide. And that clearly, is not true, because why would China invest in building 25,000 mosques?
If they were just going to kill
everyone. Yeah. And then that makes me think like, well, what country actually has a history of being genocidal in a sense towards Muslims? Well, it's not China, it's the U.S. Because the U.S. is responsible for millions of deaths in Muslim majority countries.
Muslim majority, okay. I mean, yeah, okay.
I mean,
if you're a Muslim in America, you don't get beheaded, right? Like, but I understand what you're saying. You're saying they've killed millions of people in Muslim countries. Okay.
While one
overseas, not domestically.
Yeah. Exactly. I just don't think that's true. I had a lot more listed for the Ukrainian famine. You can skip that. We can go to question number 4 if you want.
Yeah, you want to make this a 2-part thing? Because I didn't know we were going to go on this long. You want to make this a 2-part thing?
Gary, you have to run?
I got a couple more minutes. I suppose I can do 5 and 5.
Yeah. Damn it. Okay. I mean, think we have enough time for one more?
We definitely have time for one more. Yeah, I got 20 minutes.
All right, let's do one more because it's not even that much. So we'll do one more and we'll come back for round 2, I guess, later this week. Gary, you're running from the.
I'm almost 2 hours. We're an hour and a half out. I guess we started. Yeah, an hour and a half.
All right. Next question, Gary.
All right, let me pull up the next question. I don't even remember where I put my questions. Hang on. We went on so long. I don't remember where I put my questions. Hang on.
You want me to do it?
Yeah, you want to read the next? I can't find where I put my questions.
For Gary, in a libertarian society, the non-aggression principle ought to be the basis of governmental law. Don't initiate the use of force against peaceful people. Don't hurt people. Don't take their stuff. What is the basis for law in a
I want to add one thing that's not usually put in the non-aggression principle: honor your contracts. So those 3 things, but that's not really entitled. Most libertarians will add that, but that's not really part of the non-aggression principle. I want to add that. Yeah, I
know why it's not added, but
we're add that in. Yeah.
It's not added. I'm not adding it in.
Okay. Without contract, you don't have anything, right? Without on a contract, you have nothing.
I mean, the basis of socialism and communism, was, I think, just excellently put by Karl Marx. I know we've said this before on other debates, but from each according to his ability to each according to his needs. That is like a foundational thought of like how a socialist and then a communist society should function. And the goal of communism is the elimination of exploitation and oppression socially, politically, and economically. It's the elimination of classes, the elimination of the state, the elimination of money. That is only possible through a transitional period of socialism, where the working class gains political and economic power to build up the productive forces, to destroy poverty, and build up enough forces for defense against the inevitable counter-revolution or outside threat. For example, the Soviet Union famously, in its inception, it was invaded by 14 Western countries, one of them being the U.S. I mean, most people don't realize this, but we invaded the Soviet Union actually before with, I think it was like 14,000 Marines, and took actually the major eastern seaport of the Soviet Union. Most people don't know that, but that did happen. And obviously, we funded the White Army and funded the Civil War in the Soviet Union after that, which was a deeply anti-Semitic force that actually went around committing massacres and atrocities against Jewish people. So yeah, I mean, like that's like the goal. I mean, for the basis of law, I mean, it's again the first one, but law is, for example, the Constitution, the law, right? It's going to be socially determined, so to speak, right? So Cuba, China, the Soviet Union, they could have different statutes on their legislation, so to speak, right? But
there's a fundamental basis.
The moral basis
Yeah.
is from each according to his ability to each according to his needs. Like that is it. That's why we have the protection of human necessities like shelter, like food, work. People need to work to survive. People need to make money to survive because we're still in a system that has money. That's just an unfortunate reality.
Which was the last question. Do they? What if they don't have to? Do they still have to? But that's for the last question.
That's part two, Gary.
That's part two. So I guess my last question here, right? The non-aggression principle, which basically says don't initiate force against peaceful people. Right? Don't hurt people. Don't take their stuff. And I would put it onto your contracts. Do you have a problem with that?
No, but I think the idea of that still in that as like the end goal, I think is very limited. And I also think it's it doesn't account for the reality when there is that sort of monopoly of violence, and then that monopoly of violence is coming from a ruling minority class. So do we and that violence is often indirect too, right? Like poverty, I would say, is violence. The idea that we have a system where people go hungry, people don't have a home, people don't have access to medicine, basic medicine, that is violence because we have seen systems where that's not the case. So
I would say that that's man's natural state, and then we can use things, not only capitalism, but like capitalism, to progress from that. But in its barest sense, man is born impoverished.
But the reality is, Gary, like look around you. Like we're not humans from 400,000 years ago. Like we're not cavemen. Like clearly, human nature, whatever we want to call that, which communists reject as an idea, is ever changing, is ever growing, and is never static. So human nature now versus 400,000 years ago is different because the material conditions are different, Gary. Around like our natural state is not to have a computer. Our natural state is not to have a car, a train, all this stuff.
Right. I don't think if you don't have a train or a computer, if someone doesn't provide you with something, if you're not provided something, that's not violence, right? Like you don't have a claim to anyone else's property or anyone else's.
But Gary, let's say there's 10 of us on an island, right? Let's say I have declared myself leader of the island, and I have the 9 of you go do crops or go hunt a pig or something. And then I take half of that food.
Or you don't touch my food. This is why I believe in an armed society. You're actually not touching my food.
But that's what we have now. We have people that go and make food, but then they're paid so little that they are barely able to afford food and housing.
We had a society largely, especially in the South, of a huge amount of sharecroppers, which is basically what you're, right? I mean, that's basically what you're getting at, right? Basically, you're saying, over an island of 10 people, and you can kill a pig, or get some eggs from a chicken or whatever. You can keep a small portion of it.
And Ross Public on the chat with a good point. In a world with enough food, withholding food is violence. Like we produce enough food right now to feed 10 billion people, and then we just waste enough of it to where that is forced scarcity. People don't have the food to survive. So that, when we have 8 million people die every year in the world due to hunger.
I was going to say, where? Not here. Okay, in the world. Okay. But
people die here of hunger. That's not
how many. Can someone fact check how many people in the U.S. died of hunger in 2021 or 2022?
If it's one, that's too many.
I agree.
Because we have enough food where everyone can be overfed.
I agree.
We have a minority of people in power that say, no, the masses of people that actually work the land, toil the soil to produce the food, you do not have ownership of that. We do. And we're going to make a profit off of it. And then we're going to throw a bunch of it away. So it's forced scarcity. That's what's happening. That's violence.
Again, not giving someone something that's not theirs. I don't understand how that's violence, but I would agree with you, right? I as a human being, as a child in the image of God, I have the responsibility to feed people. I would agree with that.
Would you say that's initiation of force?
No, because me not giving
again, people that work the land to make the food don't own the food. Somebody else owns it that does not work that land, that then goes and sells that food for a profit and gives those workers barely enough money to survive. And in often cases, because we have 8 million people dying of hunger, they don't survive. So
did they voluntarily agree to this job?
No, nobody voluntarily decides to be exploited. That's just the state of being. A worker in Latin America under a U.S. neo-colony, right? All the industries are super exploited. There's not one there. They all get used for resource extraction.
Right, mining for rare minerals, right? Like this is the worst of it, right? Like
just keep it on food. It happens too. Corn, peaches, whatever.
Don't eat corn.
That gets produced in another country. Those workers don't have ownership of it. It's owned by somebody else in a different country even. And then they make the profit off of it. And then again, we have people in the global South largely dying or being in a state of hunger. That's not a choice. That's just a state of being. That's what exists. There's no other choice, Gary. There's no other paradise job where they're not exploited, where their resources aren't extracted to another imperial country. That's just the state of being. Is that not an initiation of force?
Well, I don't understand how there's not another option, right? There are people in those countries that don't do that, right? There's not everyone in that country.
What do you mean?
So give me a country where every single person
is exploited?
Yeah.
Any of the Francophone countries. So, for example, any of the countries where were colonized by France that belong under the Francophone umbrella, their entire economy is held in French banks. Their financial reserves are held in French banks. The mining industry, the agricultural industry, that is all used for resource extraction to other imperial countries, other Western countries.
So,
I would say every major industry is used as a tool for neo-colonial extraction.
So Haiti or Cameroon, countries like that.
Yes. For example, we have the U.S. government. Hillary Clinton specifically went and lobbied the Haitian government to decrease the minimum wage. The U.S. government had that power. So There is no other option. When your minimum wage is 50 cents and then moves down to 30 cents, and it was a directive from another government that's not your own,
But
how
see,
is that not initiation of
okay,
violence?
but that's the government initiating force against you.
That's
If you
that's what I'm saying. Is that
if you want to say that, right, then I would say get the government out of it, eliminate the minimum wage, and let people negotiate their own wage, and that would solve the problem.
so?
When you
If the working class, as a result of that, decided we will now take political and economic power and create a system, a society where that doesn't happen, is that an initiation of force, or is that a reaction to the initiation of
no,
force?
if individuals wanted to work together to say we're going to demand better wages or better conditions, that's free market at work. I love it.
But it's not the free market. But
But
we're
it
getting
is the
to
free
that. We'll
market.
get into that in the second
That's the
part,
second
Gary.
part. Yeah.
Second part. Everyone that listened to this, Ross, Unlikable Airwaves, thank you. I really appreciate you guys tuning in. Everyone go well. And for those that are interested, I know it's not a political channel, but Gary's Texas boxing scene. For those that are curious about boxing, Gary's always at events, getting interviews, doing great work. He has an article now out on TexasBoxingScene.com about a fighter, Omar Juarez. There's a documentary coming out about him, so definitely check that out. And obviously, me and Gary have Mixed Combat Radio, which is a weekly boxing podcast over on YouTube and Twitch. So on Twitch is under the same umbrella, Turning Down Network. So if you're on Twitch, like Ross, Unlikable Airwaves, Frank, Hookups in the chat, that's a weird name, probably a bot. You guys, don't worry. When me and Gary are not live, because we don't do live anymore for that.
Yeah.
So
only on Patreon.
Yeah, if you're on Twitch, then if you want to see me and Gary talk about boxing and stuff, youtube.com/Mixed Combat Radio. Fun stuff. We're also joined by my lovely partner, Melody Joy, from the Beauty of Boxing, beautyofboxing.com. Go check it out and support. Love you too. What else? This is part one, I guess. Gary has to run. We have, 4 more questions? Technically, 1, 2, 3, 4 more questions to run through, and we'll probably come back later this week. Gary, let the people know where to find you, even though I already did it.
Yeah. You can find me all forms of social media, 3Boxing Black. You can also find me at Texas Boxing Scene on YouTube. From Texas to the world. Texas is still not a country. Can you believe that?
It won't be.
We could do a show on that. Within a couple of years.
Read Gerald Horn's book on Texas. I'll send you a link.
What is it about the independence of Texas, or is it about yeah? Okay. Well, is it the slavery thing? Is it that?
I'm just saying, check it out, man.
Okay. All
right. Find me, Matt Hunter, MCR, all social media platforms. Like, find each other, show all that fun stuff. Peace.